When you guys think of the worst expansion in Hearthstone, right? You often think of the expansion that there are OP legendaries, things that warp the metagame, cards you absolutely despise playing against. And I would say that a lot of people would probably think the worst expansion or one of the worst expansions was the Witchwood, right? If you don't remember the Witchwood had this card in it. It had Shuttlewalk in it. And Shuttlewalk was a really, really frustrating card because it was like the combo destroyer. No other deck could outvalue this thing. It was insane. On top of that, Baku the Moon Eater was a really, really important effect in the Witchwood. It was so impactful that they ended up rotating it 1 year early because they just didn't want this play pattern to be in Hearthstone. But we're not talking about the worst expansion today, though. We're talking about the expansion that fundamentally changed Hearthstone for the worst. And that expansion is the Grand Tournament. Now, I know what you guys are probably thinking. What are you talking about? Why would it be the Grand Tournament? Let me tell you why. We first have to start off with the very beginning of Hearthstone, which was, of course, Classic Hearthstone. Classic Hearthstone was a really good game, okay? Now, most people, when they first got into Hearthstone, it was their very first card game. At the time Hearthstone was released in 2013, it was a pretty crazy time for Blizzard because even if you have never played World of Warcraft, you probably heard about Alliance or Horde, something along those lines. And when you heard Blizzard's making a card game, it's like really good studio making a genre that has never really been done well on the virtual like PC virtually. This is a really big time for Hearthstone. And the way that Blizzard designed this game was really important because it was super easy for players to get into. One of the biggest problems with games like Magic the Gathering is that there's a huge investment to get into it, right? Not only do you have to go out and buy the cards, but you fundamentally have to learn how to play the game. And then you have to go find places to actually play the game unless your friends had it. And when you're super young, when this game came out, like when this game came out, I was 15, 16. I'm not spending my money on Magic the Gathering. Are you insane? But when Hearthstone came out, it was free to play. It was fundamentally changing the industry forever, right? And you can see it now. Runeterra, Magic Arena, Marvel Snap, they're all here because of this particular game right now, right? It was a very big deal. Hearthstone was very successful. It was a very, very good base set. One of the best things that Hearthstone Classic had was that they had the ability to balance the game around all existing cards in the format. You know, when a new expansion comes out and the Hearthstone balance team is all out of whack because they're like, oh, we're introducing all these new cards. We don't really know how they're gonna interact with everything. Classic Hearthstone was great because they balanced the entire game around all of the cards available. Now, did they do a perfect job? Depends on who you ask, but for what it was pretty great. And Hearthstone was basically set up to be one of the best games, if not the best card game ever made. Now relax, I know some people in the chat are gonna be like, wait, Magic the Gathering is still best. It's fine, just hold on, let me speak. After Classic Hearthstone came out in 2014, very soon after, surprisingly, we got Curse of Naxxramas. All right, now Curse of Naxxramas was a very big thing for Hearthstone because a lot of players, like even me from personal experience, I didn't even think that Hearthstone would have expansions. I thought the game was just going to be those cards and that was it. This was a very big moment in Hearthstone, right? People are typing Nax out in chat. People still say Nax out after all these years because it was so impactful to players. I couldn't wait to play Naxxramas, and I guarantee all of these new players who came to this card game were really excited for Naxxramas. And honestly, you got to really shout out Blizzard because the way that they did it was fantastic. Not only did they give you brand new cards, they gave you a reason to be invested into the story of Naxxramas. I had no idea what Naxxramas was, and I felt like I had a stronger connection to Naxxramas than maybe the original game because there was a story to it, and it felt really fun to earn those cards. It felt like it was an actual adventure, and Naxxramas was awesome, except for one thing. And that was this card right here. Now, if you don't remember this card is called Undertaker. This card was a severe problem because it showcased two issues with Hearthstone that we didn't really see in Classic up until that point in time. Number one was the lack of Blizzard doing nerfs or buffs to the game. This card fundamentally warped the meta around it and made a deck called Undertaker Hunter. That deck was an extremely aggressive archetype that not only was very cheap, which is a very big deal, and I'll get to that later, but on top of that, it showcased that introducing new cards into the game increases the power level of Hearthstone, which Goes without saying, most of the time when you make something new to the game, you want it to be impactful, but this card was a little bit over the top. I would say that Undertaker during its time in Standard was a top 3 deck of all time in Hearthstone. It was warping the format around this card. It was ridiculous. You might say to yourself, Rarran, Hearthstone does nerfs all the time. Why didn't they nerf this card? And that was the second big thing about Hearthstone that people did not really expect. And that is Ben Brode and their team was making a card game for new players. And if you're a brand new player for the game, one of the things you don't want to do is overwhelm them with information. So if you're a brand new player and you're constantly logging into Hearthstone, but you don't have a ton of time to play, so maybe you're going for like once a week or twice a week, you don't want to be overwhelmed. You want to just be able to play the deck that you want to play. So if they constantly did buffs and nerfs, the retention of players would feel like they're overwhelmed. They're brand new to card games. They didn't want to do that. There's also the huge economy side for that, but that's for a different video at this time, which means Undertaker Hunter was in the game for a very long time. Most of the time, cards in Hearthstone that are absolutely broken currently, I want to say, are nerfed within a month. This card, chat, how many of you guys know how long this card was unnerfed? 6 months this card was unnerfed. That means that up until the release, even after the release of GVG, Undertaker Hunter was still in the game, absolutely dominating. And because the deck was so cheap, people were able to craft it. They were able to absolutely roll ladder with it. Let's be real here, guys. Let's be real. I'm not gonna say aggro decks are really easy to play, but I think it's pretty easy to play Undertaker Hunter, right? You full mull for it, you hit face, your opponent dies. It's pretty easy. So every single person had access to this. The only thing you had to do was just unlock the card through Curse of Naxxramas. By the time this card was nerfed, we got to our very next expansion, Goblins versus Gnomes. Came out December 8th, 2014, chat. That's when Goblins versus Gnomes came out. And before we even get to this set, because I think this set is extremely impactful as well, I want to show you guys, just in case you just don't believe me for some reason, this card was nerfed January 29th, 2015. Almost 2 months after this expansion was released, Undertaker Hunter was still a very good deck to play in Hearthstone. So Goblins versus Gnomes comes out, and this is the very first time I'm gonna actually look at cards that were released during the set. If I asked you right now, how did you feel about Goblins versus Gnomes? I can almost guarantee you that it would either be one of the following. You hated this expansion or you love this expansion. This was a very polarizing expansion, and they did this very intentionally because this expansion was one of the most random expansions Hearthstone has ever done. They basically all had the text random +1 attack, unstable portal, really good effect. It was absolutely dominant. Random. Goblin Blast Mage, a very impactful card in Mech Mage. Random. A card like this, random. Like, this is like turbo randomness. I hope they never make a card like this ever again. One of my most hated cards of all time is this one right here, and I am a Warlock main. But you know why they did this is because they realized very soon after Hearthstone's release is that what do new players like more than just playing the game and really thinking about their turns, right? Most players who play Hearthstone are not going to be this high legend player. Most of them are going to be in silver or gold or whatever what the ranking system was back at the time. Let's make the game more random. If we make the game more random, people who don't want to be a high legend player can just have fun in Hearthstone. And again, if you look at a lot of these cards, there was a huge emphasis on making sure that randomness was very important. Also, they released mech archetypes for some classes. Cards like Cogmaster ended up seeing a ton of play because mechs were really good in the expansion, and they did that intentionally. They wanted players to feel like, hey, you don't have to be a high legend god to run Miracle Rogue. You could just play Mech Mage. It's a pretty simple deck. It's not going to take you a lot of brain power, but you'll probably have a lot of fun playing it, and you'll end up winning games for it. And it was a super important expansion. And that's also one of the reasons why Discover is such a popular keyword and they keep bringing it back, is because people love randomness. And the core part of this expansion, the core mechanic of this expansion was spare parts. The mechanic of the expansion, chat, was randomness. And randomness is what made Hearthstone come into the limelight. But this set, chat, I promise you guys, after the release of GVG and the nerf of Undertaker, was ginormous for this game. And if people think back, like I've been playing this game since closed beta. If I think back to what expansion I probably played the most, it was probably Goblins versus Gnomes. Also, because of GVG, Hearthstone tournaments got a little bit more exciting. One of the tournament moments I can remember where Rarran was against, I think, Life Coach. He unstable portaled and got a Kor'kron Elite and Mage, and he won the game. And on top of that, I can't disrespect my boy Dr. Boom. Crazy effect. The randomness of the boom bots was extremely interesting to play with and against. Sneed's another fan favorite here. People love this effect because summoning a random legendary at the time was like, what the hell? This is insane, right? It's so crazy. Hearthstone realized very soon after the release of, you know, Classic, that this game isn't just about hardcore card players anymore. This game is about, you know, the casual player. And if you don't believe me, chat, the very next expansion showcases what they started to do. Blackrock Mountain. I don't know about you guys. I love this set. This is one of my favorite sets of all time. Not only thematically, but just the cards in the game were so fun to play with. If you don't remember what this expansion was, or I should say adventure at the time, again, this was a smaller set. This introduced us to two of the probably most famous cards of all time, Grim Patron and Emperor Thorson. These two cards were so important to Hearthstone as well, because not only did this add another way of playing Hearthstone with just neutral mana cheating, so combos that you couldn't do before were added to the game, it showcased a brand new archetype with Grim Patron, showing people that like new cards into this game are always going to be impactful. How many of you guys who played during this set tried Grim Patron Warrior? Because either you saw a high level streamer play it, or maybe you went against it on ladder and went, what the hell just happened to me? On top of that, we were also introduced to Nefarian, which added, you know, 2 random cards from your opponent's class. Again, not a very impactful card, but goddamn, bro, this card was hyped as hell. This was a very good set in Hearthstone. Dragon Priest was finally alive, which was cool. That was probably the bigger thing. Flamewaker, again, randomly split among all enemies. Not only was Grim Patron a really good way of appeasing the competitive Hearthstone players, but they were still realizing that most of our player base was a big fan of randomness, a big fan of doing crazy, wacky stuff. If you go watch these Trollden videos from a while ago, dude, you will see exactly what I'm talking about, which leads us to our next expansion, chat, the Grand Tournament. Now, I said at the beginning of this, the Grand Tournament was a very big deal. And the reason why it was a big deal was because this was the first big expansion, because I did not mention this. Do any of you guys remember what happened between Goblins versus Gnomes and Blackrock Mountain? Do any of you guys remember what happened? It allowed people to play Hearthstone on their mobile device. Mobile gaming in the year 2015 was the year that Hearthstone had an iOS and Android application. You don't need a PC to play Hearthstone anymore. You just need your mobile device. And, you know, you know that Blizzard meme?
Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
More players than ever were going to try Hearthstone. We also got Tavern Brawl during this time, which was like, I believe the very first Tavern Brawl they ever did was like Nefarian versus Ragnaros. People were big fans of that. Tavern Brawl was a brand new way to play Hearthstone. It just changed the rules slightly. It was a big deal. I want to show you guys something that I look at regularly, which is Google Trends. Here is the Google Trend of Hearthstone. Now, some of you guys might not understand what this means. Google Trends is basically how popular a search term is at any given time. So if you write in Hearthstone right now, you are affecting how popular Hearthstone is during March 2023 when I'm recording this video. This is when Hearthstone was released, right around here. This is when Curse of Naxxramas was released. This is when Goblins versus Gnomes was released. This is when mobile device for Hearthstone was released. Do you guys know what this tick is right here? The highest on the Google Trends? That is the Grand Tournament. And you can see how hyped this expansion was. You can see the most popular time ever in Hearthstone was the Grand Tournament. And this is where we come to the Grand Tournament fundamentally changed Hearthstone forever. Now, before we go any further, we first have to summarize what I've been talking about for the past 20 minutes or so. Number one, there's a really fun feeling of looking at new cards and trying to react to them, trying to guess how good a card was going to be. It was a really big moment. It's always a big moment in Hearthstone. Every expansion has been extremely impactful to Hearthstone's metagame. We look at Curse of Naxxramas, dominated by Undertaker. GVG came out after Undertaker was nerfed. We saw a huge change in the metagame. Then we saw Blackrock Mountain come out. Huge difference of Flamewaker Mage into Emperor Thorson decks, into Grim Patron, right? Things were looking up. We had the mobile release for Hearthstone 2. We have to remember that, right? I don't know about you guys, but the flavor of the Grand Tournament was one of my favorites of all time. It looked goofy as hell, right? It looked crazy interesting. There are so many different characters coming into. Who doesn't like a huge battle of all these really interesting characters, right? Look at the just array of different characters in this cinematic. Just this one shot alone. You thought I didn't pause this on purpose, chat? I did. Trolls. I believe this is like an undead. We have like this cute looking frog thing. We have mech horse, a panda, a dwarf. I believe that's a dwarf. Whatever this guy is, probably just a stray human. There's so much going on that even if you were invested into the World of Warcraft universe, this got you really excited. This expansion was going to be released August 24th, 2015. Not only was there going to be a couple of new keywords and like a pseudo keyword, basically, which was the joust. We also got this quest log, which is the introduction of the high rank bonus chest. Now, this bonus chest was pretty great because it gave you a reward for doing well in ranked. And at this time, a lot of you guys probably don't remember that Hearthstone was not the best game in terms of free to play because the economy was mimicking real life card games. So when they announced this, it was a pretty big deal, right? It gave you an incentive to play more. It gave you a reason to play better. It was a pretty great time. We got two exciting ideas for keywords, right? We got Inspire. Inspire was basically when you hit your hero power, your cards do an additional thing. We also got Joust, which was a mechanic of you pull one card from each player's deck. Whoever has the highest cost card, if you're the card who played the Joust card, you win the Joust, right? Which means you get an additional effect. But it doesn't make any sense playing Joust because Joust was all about tempo. And in order for you to win Joust, you had to build a pretty high-end deck. So it kind of ended up just being a useless mechanic into the game, unfortunately. But I will say, even though Inspire and Joust did not end up being a super impactful mechanic, people were excited, right? I remember when they showcased Inspire and I was like, damn, that sounds like a really cool thing. I love using my hero power. There's something really juicy about playing for value. And the randomness didn't disappear with this expansion, by the way. The power level of this expansion cannot be understated of how bad it was for Hearthstone. And this is the first time I'm really gonna talk about bad. This expansion having super weak cards was really, really bad for Hearthstone. But there was a couple of fun ones, right? Spellslinger was really cool. It was fun. People really liked Caldara Drake. It was super interesting. Murloc Knight ended up being a pretty great card. This was like probably one of the best Joust cards into the game because it actually works. We all know about this card. This card ended up being very powerful because of it. This card, fan favorite card right here, Burgle. Oh my God, people love Burgle. But again, it wasn't super great because the power level of this card was just so weak. This card really showcased the balancing for this set. This card is really bad. It's pretty shit, chat. It's pretty garbage. The main thing I want to talk about this expansion is that most of the cards in this set were just not good. This was a big deal because like I showed you guys before, going up until the Grand Tournament, this is still, according to Google Trends, the most popular Hearthstone expansion of all time. The Grand Tournament is the very first expansion where I pre-ordered, chat. I was so excited, and maybe I'm not doing enough justice here of actually hyping up this expansion enough, but everything was coming together, dude. It was so cool. I wanted the card back so bad as well. I was so amped for the card back. You might be asking yourself, Rarran, what is this huge significant drop? Does anyone know what this is? The downtrend is from the Grand Tournament all the way into the League of Explorers. And we can see where the League of Explorers comes out. It's that little tick right here. This is where the League of Explorers is. But look at the dramatic drop from this moment up until the release of the Grand Tournament. And why did this happen? People didn't feel like they got their money's worth, right? If I'm gonna put $80 for a bunch of packs, I want them to be good. And this is speaking from personal experience. I felt horrible. I was pissed. I was like, Blizzard taking my money? And because there was no duplicate protection at the time, a lot of the cards you opened sucked ass. Grim Patron ended up being nerfed, which was a very big deal because the most popular deck in the format ended up being a deck that played on curve for the entire time. Secret Paladin ended up being really good because of this card right here. It turned out that, you know, 6-mana 6/6 pulling a bunch of secrets out of your deck was really good. Again, just like Mech Mage from Goblins versus Gnomes, this was a pretty easy deck to play. It was very cheap. It ended up being super popular. So not only was Hearthstone disappointing in the sense that the cards didn't live up to the expectations, not only was the mechanics of this set just not super impactful for the game, we ended up going against a deck that was basically Face Hunter version 2.0, but arguably more frustrating to play against. Because if you died to Undertaker Hunter, it was quick, right? You knew it was over. Mysterious Challenger, you'd be like, oh, I'm finally okay. They would play this card. Bunch of secrets came out. How many of you guys don't like secrets? I guarantee there are a couple of you that just don't like secrets. And this card would come out, followed by Dr. Boom, followed by Tyrion Fordring. And it felt like almost every single deck played the exact same for a really long period of time. And remember when I talk about nerfs, chat? Blizzard didn't think that Secret Paladin was a problem. And to be fair, comparatively to like Undertaker Hunter before it or Grim Patron Warrior, it wasn't as dominant, but you did see it still a lot. This is my thesis, chat, of why the Grand Tournament was not only the most hyped, but the most disappointing expansion of all time. And it fundamentally changed Hearthstone forever. Because what if, chat, Hearthstone had the philosophy they do now where they made balance changes? Imagine if a lot of these cards were just more powerful. Where would Hearthstone be on this Google trend? Would it have maybe maintained its popularity? We'll never know. I'll give Blizzard credit because they clearly saw what happened with the Grand Tournament and they made probably the most fun expansion, I want to say maybe ever. Like it was, if you know, you know, which ended up being the League of Explorers. People love the League of Explorers. I still remember it fondly. Another great adventure. It had a really good trailer. It was hyping people up. It introduced Discover. And thankfully, because of the League of Explorers, it did bring some hype back. And then this is where I believe we got the first rotation with Old Gods, but then you could see what happened after that. Well, that's my video, I guess, on why the Grand Tournament fundamentally changed Hearthstone forever.